is happening in jolly old England. People across the country riot in a massive and extraordinary way. Stranger still, many people don't seem to know why they're rioting. Afterwards, a possible explanation surfaces. Now that's strange, because we really don't know what boredom is. But maybe we should.
Everybody gets bored, and which is probably one of the reasons why it's so understudied.
There is barely any research on boredom.
It's quite a new area.
Don't know all that much about it.
Not only that, there are serious questions about the world's #1 expert on boredom. Who is he? Where does he come from? There was obviously something strange going on. And that's where I come in. I guess I specialize in the obvious, making documentaries about things that are sometimes so obvious we don't notice them, like stupidity, laughter, and maybe boredom. I got on the story one day after an incident in the waiting room. Suddenly, I realized I had lost my iPhone. I had this very weird feeling. Boredom. What was it? Where did it come from? What does it do to you? The truth is, nobody knows. I was amazed that boredom was such an unknown quantity, because without exception, we all seem to experience it. So I decided to try and find out what boredom actually is. Why not? But where do you start? Well, the Boring Institute, of course. About an hour from New York City is the headquarters of the most quoted institution on the subject of boredom. But it turns out that the Boring Institute is just an apartment in the New Jersey suburbs. And Alan Karuba, the Boring Institute's head spokesman, is its only employee. Why did you start the Boring Institute?
Well, the Boring Institute started off as a joke. I was in a jolly mood, and so I put out a list of the 10 most boring celebrities of the year. It was fairly predictable. We all know much more about Lindsay Lohan than we really want to know. I just did it for fun. I'm a public relations man. I write press releases. Except that the list went around the world. Great Britain and Japan and Peru, and just thought, oh, I'm onto something here. And I really was. I had not realized that boredom was such a massive condition in the world. I mean, as I went along, I developed a real sense of the danger of boredom in people's lives. Boredom can kill you. People commit suicide because they're bored. I was asked a lot of serious questions about it initially, and I had no answers.
Because of the high profile of his list of boring celebrities, and because there weren't really any other boredom experts, Karuba and his Boredom Institute would find himself answering international media questions about the serious side of boredom.
What impact does boredom have on marriage and school and every aspect of life?
But here's the problem. The only thing we knew for sure about boredom was that we didn't know much about it, and that it can be dangerous. Yes, there is no Boring Institute. There are no true boredom experts. There's only a man with a cigar.
The result was, frankly, that I became the single expert on the topic.
Saturday night, we look alright. We're going out, boring. Paris, France, London town.
think I have a problem. I lost my iPhone, and since I did, I've noticed that when I'm in waiting rooms or on the bus or on the subway, that everything is boring. There's nothing to do, and my mind is going crazy.
When I lost my phone, I found that at first I started reaching for it every 10 seconds. I was looking, for it, and it was only because I didn't have it in my pocket that I realized that I was going through withdrawal symptoms. Walking down the street, I'd reach for my phone. Getting on the bus, I'd reach for my phone. Standing in line at the bank, I'd reach for my phone, and because I didn't have it, I was standing there realizing how much I'd grown accustomed to using it.
A British institute now claims that smartphones will eliminate boredom.
Boredom, we think, is changing a little bit. Boredom is to mobile devices which allow us to combat boredom wherever we might be. So let me give an example. We might be waiting in a queue in a store, we might be commuting on our way to work. Moments which previously, a few years ago, might have been completely dead. We couldn't really fill that time effectively, but now we can dial up our social networks, we can do our banking remotely, we can fill our time with real purposeful activity.
In fact, the rise of ubiquitous smartphone technology has led to the frequent declaration that boredom is dead. However, boredom experts disagree.
No. Why are we also bored? We're more bored than ever before, and this is the kind of the paradox. We have more things to entertain us than ever before. As you say, I mean, it's not just the television boxes, and we've got, Game Boys and everything, Facebook and social networking, and you'd think there was everything there to stop us being bored, and yet we seem paradoxically to be more bored than ever before.
Are we more bored or less bored today? We might want to know, because some say that boredom can be fatal. A recent study of thousands of British civil servants caused a furor when it seemed to correlate boredom and an early demise.
So I work on a cohort study where we're following 10,000 civil servants, and this has been going on since the 1980s. One day at work, I was looking through the very first questionnaire that we sent to the civil servants, and I noticed there was a question on boredom. And I wondered whether we could just look at the people who had since died, whether there was a link between those who reported they were bored and those who died. So we got the data, we analysed it, and we found that those who reported higher levels of boredom were twice as likely to die as those who reported no boredom. We found it interesting and thought, well, let's just try and publish it, but as a not to be taken too seriously piece of work. The media response to this little item was phenomenal. My phone was ringing off the hook. I had requests from all over the world to do interviews. It was reported in the media here, abroad, and to my surprise, it was reported on CNN. And so obviously this is of interest to people, whether boredom can kill you.
We used to think that boredom was just a trivial nuisance. Although the experience of boredom is probably quite ancient, the idea may have originated with acedia, the 8th deadly sin, not paying attention in church. The word boredom appears in print for the first time in 1852 in a Charles Dickens novel, Bleak House, a book about a never-ending legal dispute. But it's in the 20th century the concept of boredom seems to explode with the idea that certain jobs, activities, or places can be boring, and that even people can be bores.
No one likes to be called boring.
Boredom science is young, but it may counter the common view that what makes something boring is a matter of opinion. Boredom appears to obey universal laws. The most basic is that it's caused by an unstimulating environment. Perhaps the second law of boredom is that it's aggravated by repetition.
Our brain is not specialized to be particularly sensitive to repetitive events. The brain basically gets the gist. Okay, such a thing is happening. And then it loses interest.
The third is vigilance. Being forced to pay attention to something unstimulating, predictable, and repetitive, such as filling out forms, doing taxes, or accounting, is made even more boring by the fact that you must pay close attention. In the last decade, There are the beginnings of a revolution in boredom research. We used to think that when people got bored, they slow down and get sleepy. But when MRI machines came online, allowing scientists to look inside living brains, they discovered something surprising. Bored brains weren't slowing down. They seemed to accelerate. Speeding up is interesting because it points to the second important scientific discovery about boredom, that boredom distorts time. As bored brains speed up, time appears to slow down.
And it turned out that if you were prone to experiencing boredom, you would generally overestimate time. So time really felt like it passed very slowly. And if you're more likely to be bored, you're more likely to think things just go slowly.
Before, many people saw boredom as perhaps irritating, but harmless. But new research at the University of Waterloo could change everything.
This is the room where the boredom happens.
A team of neuroscientists at the University of Waterloo created a boring room where test subjects were systematically bored. They were placed in the boring chair, wired up, and then showed a series of very boring video clips. One video, which showed people putting up laundry, made almost everyone who watched it bored. The scientists then took blood samples, measured skin temperature, and the heart rates of their subjects.
Participants' heart rate was higher during the boring video than it was during a comparison video, so small, yet significant.
While the increase in heart rate was interesting, when the neuroscientists tested the blood of bored subjects, they made a discovery. The stress hormone, cortisol, was in evidence.
The cortisol levels after watching the boring video were much higher. They were significantly higher than when participants watched the sad video.
Cortisol is a hormone that's related to stress levels. That basically says that when I bore you, when I show you something that's really boring you to tears, you get agitated with it. It's not something that you can sit and tolerate for a very long period of time. It's as if your brain and your whole system wants to say, this is not active enough for me. I want to get going and do something else.
The point is, from the outside, boredom may look like a sleepy state, but it's actually a state of stress.
Elevated cortisol is a really bad thing. It makes people prone to obesity, particularly the kind that causes heart disease, thins bones, raises blood pressure, makes people feel tired, breaks down muscle. There's nothing good about having high cortisol levels on a chronic basis.
Boredom's not harmless, no. It causes, certainly in the workplace and society, all sorts of really bad stuff to happen. I call it the new stress. It is the modern day stress.
Not only was I bored, but I was stressed. And I was stressed about being bored, which was even more stressful because boredom is a kind of stress, which altogether was super stressful. If boredom is a kind of stress, this obviously has far-reaching implications for society. Hopefully, there aren't too many places where people are chronically bored. But according to the Boring Institute, there most certainly is one. It's called school.
I mean, you think about it, you take a child who is full of energy and full of curiosity, and you make him sit at the same desk, hour after hour after hour. You're controlled by the clock and by the bell, and when the bells ring and they go to the next classroom, the bells ring and they go to the next classroom, and you try to pour the appropriate, designated, authorized information into his or her skull. There is nothing more boring.
Was the Boring Institute correct? Was education, generally speaking, boring? Well, what happens when you apply the word boredom to it? Something quite dramatic if you're 11-year-old Gianmarco Trimboli. It is the fall of 2007 in Mississauga, a suburb of Toronto, Canada. Trimboli is the speech contest winner of his class. It's the new year, and there's a new contest. The kids are asked to pick a topic. Trimboli observes the kids next to him seem bored and decides to write about it. He does some research and writes his speech. His title, Boredom.
I feel like I'm about to explode. I need a change. I need air. I need a change of place. Some excitement, something, anything.
But when the day comes to give his speech, he is told to sit down, while the rest of the class reads theirs. He is not allowed to participate, and he is sent to the principal's office. Then, a series of events take place.
My wife called me, I was at work, and she said, "Do you know the speech that Marco spent all this time on? He wasn't allowed to read it, and he spent the whole afternoon outside the hall in front of the principal's office." So I was kind of upset at that because we saw the rough draft, it got approved, and up until the final day, he was then told he couldn't read a speech. So right then and there we thought, okay, something's wrong. So when I got home, my wife elaborated that the principal, Miss Devlin, wanted to see us the next day in her office. This is derogatory towards the teacher. If Marco wants to, he has to change it, and then we'll grade and mark it, but he lost his chance to say his speech. So right then and there we asked Marco in the principal's office, "Do you want to change your speech?" Because it's his speech. And he said no.
Suddenly, there was a lot of pink slips coming home. Pink slips, he was going to be expelled from the school.
There was an article in the local paper, and the next day, the Monday, Gianmarco was on the front cover of the National Post.
While Trimboli's speech Boredom would never be read aloud in school, it would be published in full in a national newspaper.
And I read this newspaper article about this kid who wrote an essay, and because of his essay on boredom, they told him to leave the school. And I thought, this is me. This is what happened when I was 10 years old in grade 5. One day the teacher walks into class and says, "I'm going to do what's called spontaneous oral composition." And she gave me the letter N, and all I could think of for N was noise. And all I could think of for noise is kids make noise when they're bored in school. And I got up there and I just started speaking and saying how, you know, kids come to class, we're really excited and really motivated, and sometimes we make noise, and the reason we make noise is because sometimes we get bored. And I don't think I got a chance to say much more than that when suddenly I hear, "Enough!" And the teacher starts going around the room and says, "Class, tell me what you think about what Ellen just said." So, yeah, one kid puts up his hand and the teacher goes, "Yes," and he goes, "Well, you know, I sort of agree with what Ellen said." That she would like Ellen to come immediately to her office. And she says, "I am so disappointed in you, Ellen. I can't believe what you did. You are leaving the school and you are not going to come back until you see a psychologist and your parents have that psychologist say that it's okay for you to come back."
Despite being thrown out of school for stating that kids get bored, today, Ellen Warner is a top oncologist at Toronto's Sunnybrook Hospital.
Yes, the educational system is the boring institute.
This man is obviously insane. But what if he's right? Is it possible that compulsory education is actually an unintentional boring machine? A place that manufactures boredom? If you wanted to create a machine which chronically bores people, how would you do it? First, you would wake up children early in the morning to get an early start. Then we rush them to a large and alienating industrial structure. According to the rules of boredom, you need to surround your subjects with an unstimulating environment. This expert says that children are literally destimulated the moment they enter school.
When children first enter school, it's very clear what the first rule is, and that is you must remain quiet.
How would you do it quietly, Bobby?
Although recent studies show that humor stimulates broad areas of the brain, here, there is no joking around.
Laughter is definitely banned in most classrooms.
To be truly boring, fun must be removed. At school, play, possibly the essence of childhood, is virtually eliminated, with only tiny allotments allowed for recess. Play now becomes an elite activity called sports, with most children relegated to the sidelines. To be boring, though, education systems must emphasize repetition. School curriculums are based on learning by repetition, the second law of boredom. seemingly infinite grammatical variations, endless mathematical exercises that often go on for over a decade. Children are isolated, then played against each other in a battery of tests, grades, and measurements. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans were active, mobile animals. But suddenly, with the arrival of compulsory education, they are turned into sedentary sitters.
At the end of each day, I just feel so tired of sitting, which is really strange, because you shouldn't feel tired if you're not moving, but...
I mean, if I'm sitting in school all day, I have to say the one thing I'm best at the end of the day of school is sitting. Like, that's what I've learned to do the most.
Where is it written that you have to learn how to sit still? Where you have to sit still to learn how to read? That you have to sit at a desk to write?
Starting in elementary school, you get yelled at when you get out of your seat. And all through elementary school and then through high school. And so, you know, the social proof of sitting must be good because everyone else is doing it, I think causes almost everybody to unquestioningly sit and sit some more, even if it's really killing them.
Constant sitting makes our brains sluggish and could really be killing us. New science says that sedentary culture is responsible for 35 chronic illnesses, including heart disease, cancer, and depression. And despite the mounting evidence, it appears as though we are getting more sedentary, not less, probably due to the overuse of computers. After that information, all the interviews in this film are conducted standing up. Now, according to an American neuroscientist, something very specific happens to just about everyone the moment they stop moving.
There's an area of the brain called the cerebellum. The cerebellum is right in the back of the brain. It's responsive to movement. And so when a person's sedentary, you know, that cerebellum's blood flow is dropping down. Because see, the cerebellum affects the prefrontal cortex, this area right behind your forehead that has to do with attention, concentration, judgment, impulse control, forethought, and planning. The longer a person sits, particularly if the activity is more routine and it's not that novel or interesting, then this function in the cerebellum will start to decrease. The person will find themselves fighting to stay awake. And so that child or adult is going to have sketchy learning. You know, that person will only be able to get that brain out of boredom, you know, through some movement.
But here's the twist. According to new research, the very thing that the education system controls, reduces, and often eliminates, fun and play, may be our ultimate educational tools. A study at the University of Lethbridge in Canada shows that rats who are denied play were socially maladaptive, had weaker immune systems, and may be less intelligent. It is unstructured play itself that may produce the most neurological growth. The brains of children may grow more at recess than they do in the classroom.
Why do we put 30 kids in a classroom? Why do we have desks? Why do we have kids sitting? It's a model. It's an old model. Why are we now, 150 years later, still with the same physical model? That's the factory model. There is no pedagogical research that supports that model. Nowhere.
We spent 12 or more years educating our children to combat a natural tendency to only focus on things for 20 to 30 minutes.
The teachers are bored because they're trapped by the same curriculum as the children.
When I'm bored, I say, I'm so bored I could rip my fingernails off, or I'm so bored I could kill somebody.
I'm so bored I want to shoot myself.
I'm so bored I could...
We're deliberately boring our students because we have set up a structure that leads automatically to boredom.
Who here was bored in high school?
We've been so dumbed down by the school system that anything that's shoved our way to provide an hour or so of entertainment is welcome. And the notion of picking up a book is usually associated with school, so we tend not to do that.
Because of its emphasis on sitting and repetition, and the repression of play, our compulsory education system may actually be an industrial boring machine. And boredom is likely a stress condition. A recent study on prolonged stress says it may actually cause the human brain to shrink. Could we be bored, but not realize it? In the 1930s, New York-based psychologist Joseph Barmak performed a series of studies on the effects certain drugs would have on masking boring, repetitive jobs. He was amazed that giving workers amphetamines hid the tedium of their work. The problem was, amphetamines drove people crazy, or it killed them. He found another substance that did exactly the same thing, without the dangerous side effects. That substance is caffeine. One of the reasons that modern urban life seems so exciting is that there are usually so many people around.
What I noticed with people in crowds or even just walking around the street or walking to the subway, going anywhere really, I noticed that people are not really, they're not present, they're not here at this moment right now. They're continuously focusing on the past or the future, and they're in their minds, they're in their heads, and they don't see what's happening. They can't hear the sounds, they can't hear the cars that I can hear in the background right now and all the chatter of the people talking. They don't see the birds that are in the trees, they don't see the sky. And they're just completely in their heads, trying to get from A to B, reducing, as I say, this present current moment right now to a means to an end. There's people everywhere and they're not even seeing each other.
Most of our childhood is the world of compulsory education. Desks, writing, and sitting. But we soon graduate to another kind of tedium, work. I wonder, does the oral exam become the boring speech, PowerPoint presentation? Does the endless class become the endless meeting?
A lot of people use meetings as an excuse to sit. During long periods of sitting, pretty quickly your body goes into a dormant state. And in fact, in a prior company that I ran, as meetings were getting longer and longer, we fixed that really quickly by making all meetings stand-up meetings.
When I looked at emotions in the workplace, the most commonly hidden emotion at work is anger, and the second one is boredom.
What is clear is that boredom appears to work in stages. Stage 1, time distortion. As the person becomes bored, time begins to slow. 2, disengagement. The bored person disengages from the world around them. 3, heart rate increase. Research shows that a minor increase in heart rate as a person becomes bored signals a potential stress reaction. Stress. After being bored for a while, the stress hormone cortisol floods the person's system. 5, escape attempts. The bored person may try to escape the situation by fidgeting, fantasizing, or daydreaming. Play attempts. The bored person attempts to play, trying to create some excitement. Yawning. While the science isn't settled on why we yawn, yawning while bored may actually help a bored person become more alert. But over time, one of the long-term effects of high levels of stress hormone is rage. While traditional addictions are well known, there is a new form of addiction which is so common and pervasive that it may be invisible. Screen addiction.
I think that we are living in unprecedented times. We're living in a culture, if you like, of the screen. These are arguably a new culture, be they mobile phones or television sets in your room which are interactive, or indeed, of course, the laptop or the desktop. We're living in a world where we're accustomed to thinking in terms of screen time, screen interaction. We even see screens as we walk around all the place. So why should a two-dimensional world that's stimulating your need to senses outcompete the three-dimensional world of 5 senses. Why aren't kids out there climbing a tree or feeling the sand between their toes, walking along a beach or walking on the grass, feeling the sun on their face, giving someone a hug? Why aren't they doing those things? Why do they prefer to sit in front of a screen? Well, what the screen does, it draws your attention to it and then it fragments it, of course. So you're constantly busy and preoccupied.
Yeah, what happens is you go to a bar or a restaurant with your partner or your spouse and there's a TV screen in the background and they're looking over your shoulder and you're going like, hello, I'm here. Television behind your head is undermining the social glue that's the cohesive element of society. We're constantly looking over our shoulders and constantly looking to see if there's anything more interesting going on, something that's going to stimulate us, something that's going to relieve the boredom of the here and now. Everything has to be 3D now. That's a really good example of this escalation of boredom. You know, we're bored of 2D. Ordinary films are boring. Who wants it? Everything's got to be 3D now. I mean, you know, that's going to get boring soon. How long will it be before it has to be 4D?
According to the neuroscientists, screens hijack the interest sections of our brains, telling us that something new and exciting is going on. This constant flashing newness makes the real world seem old and slow and dull by comparison. But this is a trick of the mind, literally. While they entertain us, the screens may actually be creating ever greater appetites. The physical reality is something else entirely.
The television and most of these things that we talk about as relieving boredom, they have limited neural stimulation in our brains because it's a passive experience. So we talk about more and more television channels, yet everybody talks anecdotally about there being nothing to ever watch.
These screens may literally fool the brain into thinking something exciting is happening, and that we are busy doing something.
I think this is changing the mindset in a way that is comparable almost to climate change. I call this mind change, in that in both cases, climate change, and let's talk about mind change, there is unprecedented phenomena, a change in what we're doing in the 21st century.
The more there is to entertain us, the more we habituate. So the more we have, the more bored we are. And the more bored we are, the more dissatisfied we get, and so it goes on.
Well, I'm going to say this, and you may need to cut this part out of the tape, you know, but just think of men and pornography on the internet, and women do the same thing. They're constructing this incredible fantasy, and then you step back and you see the real world. A man at a computer monitor with his pants down around his ankles. That's it.
Perhaps it was time to face this flashing kind of modern boredom head on. Perhaps London's Piccadilly Circus or New York's Times Square illustrate the modern boredom dilemma. While there is always more to look at and more appears to be happening, closer examination reveals something else.
Here basically is happening nothing. People just walk in. There is a guy who is actually doing his exhibition with football. Tourist people around, but yeah, nothing really is happening here. Like
people come from lots of places and they are just here for the lights.
There's not really nothing going on, to be honest.
There's nothing going on.
Yeah, it's boring.
It's boring.
People are so bored here that they gather around to see a man just standing there. We come into this world looking for adventure, meaning, and fun. But many of us find ourselves in places of imposed boredom, at school, work, and even play. A perhaps unfair economy soon sentences most of us to inescapable lives of tedium and quiet despair. Our advanced societies hide their boredom by piling on the screens stimulants and buffets of passive entertainment. We believe we can solve our boredom with smart devices which seemingly entertain us anywhere, but may be increasing our appetite for non-stop sedentary distraction. As a side effect, they make the real world boring. But nowhere do the forces of boredom converge more powerfully than a world where repetition and monotony are the rule. Politics. Here, the principle of turning off cerebellums of passive subjects can produce unintended results.
To promote academic excellence, personal
A
responsibility.
crowd stands immobile for long stretches, listening to information they've likely heard many
Everybody's
times
always pointing the finger
before.
at somebody else. You notice that?
Some politicians can even be dangerous to themselves, knocking themselves out. And it may be contagious.
Take responsibility not just for your successes, take responsibility.
I think everybody understands that Canada's a sovereign country. Around the country all the time.
And downright dangerous.
That doesn't innovate stagnates.
Results show a little something
Even just
for
reporting on
everybody.
political
Doug
affairs can put
is
people to
live
sleep.
in D.C. with the update on all of this. Doug, good morning. Good to see you. I guess 6-3-1, pretty much the way it breaks down, eh? Maybe. Hello, Doug. Hi, Doug. I guess not.
Thanks for joining us, Mr. Speaker.
And once asleep, it's difficult to reawaken.
Mr. Speaker.
To a world of potential.
Mr. Speaker.
Boredom.
And let's get right to it. Ohio is hurting. Ohioans want jobs. They want the economy to turn around. If elected.
Okay, we'll continue with Howard.
It's possible that one of the critical breakthroughs in boredom science began with a car accident in Australia.
When I was about 19, my brother had a serious motor vehicle accident, and after recovering from that injury, he reported being bored. What did he find boring? Everything.
Research now shows that people with brain injuries in their frontal lobes can get bored easily by things they didn't find boring before. This condition, the tendency to get bored quickly, is also known as high boredom proneness. It is also common with people who have no head injuries at all. In fact, a new study at the New York New School says that you can make just about anyone boredom prone by boring them. High boredom prone people, such as myself, of which there are likely many, can develop conditions like attention deficit disorder.
Today we're going to talk about the history of
people with ADHD get easily bored and they act out. They break the rules really because not enough is going on. And when they are given stimulants at the right level, they no longer feel the need to do that. And ADHD children are not ADHD if they're really interested.
And there is a common outcome for many high boredom prone people. They become thrill seekers and risk takers.
This is just speculative at this stage, but my theory is that they've had their threshold for excitement or pleasure or interest raised. And so now things that used to be pleasurable to them are no longer interesting. And this is perhaps one of the reasons why people who suffer those kinds of injuries engage in higher risk-taking behaviours.
Although they are not technically brain damaged, it may be that people who have suffered chronic boredom are in a similar situation. After prolonged boring experiences, they seem to need to find more intense experiences to wake them up and feel alive.
What they're finding is that it's a factor that can lead to risk-taking behaviors.
Risk-taking behaviors need not be dramatic. For example, chronically boring people turns them into impulse shoppers.
What happens is that after a person has been subjected to this condition for a period of time, we find that people were willing to spend more money, for example, on items that are on sale than people who were not previously tempted. People who have a very boring lives, or well, probably people who venture into the malls quite a lot. There are advantages, essentially, to having a bored consumer base. Clearly, people will spend more, I think, if they're bored more.
Worst thing in the world is a bored child, and the most dangerous creature on earth is a bored teenager.
If they're chronically bored outside of school, the human need to seek stimulation is likely to lead them to vandalise and hang out in street corners and do drugs and do all kinds of antisocial things.
And we don't know yet whether or not it's because they're trying to get a rise.
But what my research has shown is that when people have had a boring day at work, they're more likely to drive recklessly. Now, whether that's because they're seeking extra stimulation and that kind of extra edge that it gives them to, drive a little bit more dangerously or take a little bit more risks.
People drink a lot to alleviate boredom. All our bad habits tend to be an effort to relieve stress.
And certainly more people are likely to engage in risk-taking activities like unsafe sex, that kind of thing.
So consequently, boredom is kind of the background music to all of that.
If this is true, people who take a lot of risks should likely tell us they were bored as youth.
Was I bored in high school? Absolutely. High school was the worst.
Yeah, I was bored every single second of it. Pulling stuff behind cars. We started just like dragging couches and coffee tables and anything we can think of. And I swear we were the first people to call it couch surfing.
But yeah, school was extremely boring to me.
The revolutionary purpose of boredom is to say essentially that the environment that you're in isn't working anymore for you.
It meant leaving my family. It meant leaving a lot of things that were comfort for me. It's like, I'm just bored. It's not you, it's me.
When all the regular kids are just inside watching TV or playing video games or doing drugs, I'm doing something that nobody else does, something like completely insane.
When I take the stage, I let my freak flag fly.
I think that I am a little bit into shocking myself too, and I think that maybe that is where I get rid of my boredom.
Boredom is, is a cue to tell you exactly, here are your options. We're confronted with either doing something different or changing the environment in some way.
Pedal to the metal. High octane. Live fast, die young. How many have died in the race against boredom? Take boredom to the extreme, and what do you get? The void, nothingness, death. Ongoing research at the University of Limerick in Ireland says human beings hate boredom so much and are so in need of meaning that they will take desperate measures to get it. Some of us will be driven to risk, others to depression, and others to explode.
You got nothing to do, there's a riot going on. What else are you gonna do? You're gonna riot.
Although the British riots began with the shooting of a black youth by police, the way that they spread instantaneously around the country point to a wider force at work. As a reporter, I've found myself at a lot of riots, and there is one aspect of rioting that is almost never mentioned by the media. As dark as it may seem, people are having fun. Some of them, the time of their lives.
In a way, it's a good time. It's a totally different experience than a lot of just normalness, and it's not boring. You see cops around everywhere, and people are throwing bricks, and in a way, you feel really impassioned, even though once you realize it's just mindless hooliganism.
Modern rioting seems to have created a new phenomenon: recreational violence.
One of the fascinating things, though, is the way in which it seemed like everyday people got caught up with it.
They're bored, they don't have any money to do anything, to go out to have fun, so they have nothing to do. I mean, we're only going out because we get free entry.
Yeah. Can't do anything at all. And without money, there is no chance to do anything.
I think the frustration of everyone, even if they were 18 or 20 or 30, everyone went to the street and just let everything go.
And the rioters may not be the only ones fighting boredom. Are the police, who often live and work in regimental military culture, extra eager for action?
Let's face it, they were, for the people who took part, they were exciting for them. You could see there were pictures of them, they were smiling, they were beaming. For some of them, it was the most excitement they've had for years. They were ringing their friends, come along, you know. A lot of them didn't want the goods that they were stealing. They were stealing silly things, rubbish things, one shoe and, you know, things that they couldn't necessarily use. It was the thrill of it.
Whatever the original stimulus was, there were people there, you know, regular people like you and I that would see something going on outside and they'd get involved. They'd join the riots and join the excitement and the throwing of the stones and the fires. And it's actually exciting. We don't like to say it, but it is. And
these weren't always people who lead what we would call boring lives, and yet they are still potentially bored, looking for stimulation, the thrill of it all, and the danger element, the risk-taking element, the fact that they're doing something that gives them that risk-taking sensation. And the riots in Britain in the summer fulfilled that criteria for them.
Is this high-risk behavior just the world of a tiny fringe? Isn't this entire civilization living on the edge? By the way, there might actually be a cure for boredom. Scientifically, it seems to be a left-brain phenomenon produced by the over-rational, linear, and practical mind. What if you just got rid of it? This woman, who lost half her brain, claims she rarely gets bored.
I fell off a seesaw and hit my head, which triggered this very real brain disease called Rasmussen's encephalitis. And the only way to get rid of this disease was to have half my brain removed. I see people saving for the future, worried about this, worried about that, but I just love to live in the moment. I do not believe anything would bore me. I think everybody should have their left brain removed.
Maybe losing my iPhone was a bit like having my left brain removed. Suddenly, without it, I was able to find just about anything interesting. Maybe it wasn't the world that was boring.
I'm boring.
I am boring!
By the way, I'm boring.
I'm boring! I'm boring!
And then I realized, when I stopped staring at screens,
hello, I'm here.
People could actually be pretty interesting. Bored people, new research shows, will eventually have to do something to overcome their boredom. That can either be negative or positive in nature. Basically, it's up to us. But as educational reformer John Gatto once said, if we stop boring our children, we might find out that genius is as common as dirt.
You're beginning to bore me. We're ready for Lindsay Lohan. We're just sitting here desperately waiting for the latest scrap of news about Lindsay.
Well, I guess that's my story. There is no such thing as the Boring Institute, but maybe there should be. And although boredom science is very young, maybe this is a start. We live in a world brimming with excitement, yet many of us live as drones. We live in a world of wealth, yet many of us work like slaves and have no time for our family and friends. Many of us live isolated, lonely lives, even though we see people everywhere. Our obsessive focus on money means we don't see where we're actually going. In a broader sense, we could be sleepwalking to disaster. There is a sense that as a civilization, our problems are suddenly adding up. Will we survive, even though we worship at the clock? It's now clear that for us, time could be running out. But this is our reaction. Yes, our boredom may very well kill us. I don't know much, But I do have an answer for boredom. It is really quite simple, actually. Stand up. And go outside. That's all. We live on the wildest planet in the known universe, and the only one we know is alive. The odds that we exist are probably billions to 1. This world is not boring. Stand up. Let the children play, and let the adults play too. And we may find that we have finally woken up.